Thanet. Ryan Shorthouse is director of the centre-right think tank Bright Blue and a former Conservative policy advisor. Dorothy Byrne is former editor-at-large at Channel 4 News and current president of Murray Edwards College, Cambridge. And Yasmin Alibhai-Brown, the journalist, author and political commentator. The number to call if you'd like to put a question to the panel, 0345 6060 973. And don't forget, you can watch us on Global Player as well. Can't say fairer than that.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Well, welcome to you all. Sorry that you're remote again. We will be having guests back in the studio, I think, in a couple of weeks' time, but we shall make the best of it. Our first question comes from Nick in Holland Park. Nick, what would you like to ask? Hi.
Oh, hi, Iain. As usual, the answer's implied in the question, but do the panel think that $5 billion a year is good value for a public broadcaster when the government can tweet for free?
Dorothy Byrne, I have to come to you first. You spent many years working at Channel 4 News, which is also a public broadcaster, we should say as well. What do you think about this row that's broken out today with Nadine Dorries announcing a cash deal for the BBC, which doesn't include a rise for inflation, and guaranteeing the licence fee for only 6 years?
Well, I would say, in answer to your question, I'm not sure that a tweet from the government is worth anything at all, frankly. But I do notice that at the weekend, Nadine Dorries tweeted, "This will be the last BBC licence fee agreement." And I really think that that is not the way to go about determining the future of one of our most important organisations. If we need to get rid of the licence fee, we shouldn't do so. And maybe we do. Maybe there's something better, but we shouldn't get rid of it before we know we've got something better. And I think £5 billion may be too much. It may not be enough. We should definitely be sure that we get value for money, but we shouldn't mix all these things up. We've also seen the government attacking the BBC over due impartiality. And I think this whole issue of the BBC and impartiality and getting rid of the licence fee is just designed to distract us all from the rows and the problems that they're in.
Do you think it is now incumbent on the BBC to tell us how they think they should be funded in the future? Because so far they've come out with no proposals at all, just relied on the licence fee. And yet, given the advent of subscription TV with not just Sky but Netflix, Amazon Prime, etc., there are plenty more out there now. We've all got used to paying for our media in that way. Shouldn't the BBC be on the front foot now?
Well, I think it is a good idea for the BBC to start looking. Well, I'm sure it has been looking for a long time. Everybody has been looking for a long time for something that is better than the licence fee, but it's been going for nearly 100 years and they've not yet found it. I don't think it's just for the BBC to look. I think Parliament, I think everybody should be looking. But until we know that we've got it, don't get rid of what we've got. I feel in Britain, we are all too often undermining great things that we've got and not appreciating them until we lose them.
Craig Mackinlay, what do you think of the timing of this today? It's a bit obvious, isn't it? It is I don't know about a red meat or big dog strategy. It's a dead cat strategy, isn't it, to distract from the Prime Minister's problems?
Oh, I think a BBC debate has been brewing for a very, very long time. I'm not entirely sure about. I mean, we could say about anything that's announced any time it's there as a distraction from something else. But I'm sure we'll be talking about the Prime Minister's difficulties later during the show.
I'm sure we will.
I'll give you my take on the BBC. I mean, I have those, soft and warm feelings for the BBC. We've been brought up on it. It's like warm porridge. It's something that we know and love. But And I
warm
think
porridge is disgusting, I'm afraid, but...
Well, okay, but I think you put your finger on it to some extent, Ian, is that, in this modern world, we have a choice what we pay for. If we like what we get, we got a choice and we'll have more of it, just like we've seen the rise of, as you say, the Netflix and all of those online services. To think that you are forced by law, on pain of a court hearing, on pain of bailiffs, to actually pay this fee for something that you may not use is slightly anachronistic. It has a sort of a hark back to some different era. But I do love the BBC. I mean, I must say, despite all the choice out there, in terms of the radio channels I tend to listen to, BBC Radio Kent, for instance, in my region, is one that it tends to be on in the background in my car. And out of all the channels...
Not LBC.
Not LBC. I can't get it that well for whatever reason, because I do drive a bit of an older car. But in terms of the news that I tend to watch, I think BBC probably gets 50% of that viewing, actually. So we've all got those feelings for the BBC. But is it now a little bit out of date? Obviously, in the background to all this, I'm sure many will allude to, are we convinced that it is offering impartial type of programming? I mean, I've got my concerns about that at times, but that's in its own hands to convince me and others that it is properly even-handed. But there is another problem with the formula upon which it's funded. You've got some very big names, the big celebrities earning some very big money. That doesn't always fit well in what you call public paid-for broadcasting. But the reality is, I don't think the BBC would be able to compete in a truly open field. I mean, you see some of these salaries are in excess of $1 million. And I think when you compare that to, the elderly, the poorer paid who are having to pay this fee, on pain of a court case, I think just the basis upon which this is funded, I'm not sure can continue forevermore. But, as I say, I like the BBC. It is a source that I refer to. I have days where I go, oh, my heavens, that isn't very even-handed. Look at that panel. It's not sort of a cross-party type panel. We've all seen it. But let me give it one credit, that during the Brexit referendum, I will say that it was pretty even-handed, and I was impressed with that. But there are times when I am not. But it's a debate. It's a debate. We've got 5-6 years to have that debate now.
Well, let's go to one of the highly paid celebrities who often appears on the BBC, Yasmin Alibhai-Brown. Yasmin, what?
I wish. 43 pence a day. 43 pence a day. That's what
the licence fee costs. That's what the licence fee costs, yeah. Sorry? So what do you think the government should be doing about it?
Please. One of the things that we have to remember, this was Nadine Dorries tweeting, using Twitter for a serious policy debate that Craig quite rightly says we need to have. What kind of governorship is that? How do you behave like that when you tweet? And you're doing it to panic the BBC. You're doing it, as Dorothy said, to distract attention. And it's been quite interesting looking at Twitter to see how many people have come out in support. And, like Craig, there have been times when I've spat at the TV watching the right-wing bias of the BBC. Never forget, something like 7 to 8 BBC editors have walked out and into working for the Tories. For Theresa May, for David Cameron, for Boris Johnson when he was mayor. The idea that this is a lefty thing. And I also remember how Alistair Campbell used to go, attack them like an attacked dog. And that tells me that the BBC is doing something quite right. And this is just a mean, vindictive, diversionary thing that this woman, whom I cannot bear, has thrown out.
Does your feeling towards Nadine Dorries have any relevance to this debate? It's not very sisterly, is it?
Just saying.
Okay.
May I say that?
Go on,
Nadine
Dorothy.
Dorries has already shown that she's not quite got a grip on her brief. Because if you remember when she was questioned in Parliament about the future of Channel 4, which faces privatisation, she actually thought that Channel 4 was funded by public funds. So I think before Nadine Dorries is allowed to make any big decision, we should just check she actually has a basic grasp of even what the licence fee is.
Ryan Shorthouse.
Can I just pitch in there again, Ian?
No, Craig, let's hear from Ryan first. I'll come back to you in a second. Ryan Shorthouse, there's little doubt that Nadine Dorries has shaken things up in all sorts of different ways since she's become Culture Secretary. She's been accused of effectively conducting culture wars. What do you make of this announcement today?
Well, there's a licence fee settlement now for 6 years, and who knows whether Nadine Dorries will be in post for 6 years. In fact, who knows whether this government will still be in position in the next 6 years. So there's obviously still all to play for.
6 weeks.
I think it's right to freeze the licence fee for 2 years, considering the cost of living crisis and the sort of rising rate of inflation. After that first 2 years, you go to a 4-year licence fee settlement, which does rise with inflation. I think more broadly, Conservatives should always be very mindful of the fact when they're trying to reform institutions. Why are they doing it? What is the problem? And they need to think that through very carefully before making very drastic changes as they're proposing. I mean, in terms of what's wrong with the BBC, I hear a lot of people from the Corbynite left say it's too right-wing, and a lot of people maybe on the right who think it's too left-wing. So maybe that cancels it all out and it's doing something right. And of course, when people do criticise the BBC for being politically biased, remember it's not just a faceless bureaucracy. It's full of hard-working professionals, hard-working journalists who take their job very seriously. So when we're criticising the BBC for bias, we're criticising individual journalists who take their job, I know, very, very seriously. So there's accusations of being intensely political. But, you know, apart from these intensely political people, I think the BBC is very popular. The funding model is very popular. And from the evidence I've seen, it adds real value to the economy. There has been studies which have been commissioned by the BBC, admittedly, which suggest that the current model is superior to other funding models in terms of value for money. But you know, I think there is an argument about overreach in terms of the BBC, in terms of its programmes. And John Whittingdale, the former culture minister, has talked about if you don't have a licence fee model, maybe you go to the core services being taxpayer grant funded, and then above that, having a subscription model. I think, you know, it's perfectly fine to look at possible solutions like that. But as I say, I think at the moment, the current model is quite popular. It proves to have good value for money. And in fact, if you look at other countries with this sort of funding model, actually the UK is lower than other countries that have this sort of licence fee model. So I think Conservatives just need to be very careful about the reforms that they're proposing to the BBC, considering its popularity away from intensely political people.
Craig, you wanted to come in.
I did. You asked about the timing of this. Is it being used to deflect from other issues, shall we say? If you're trying to get, or the government trying to get a decent crack of the whip on the BBC, it seems a very strange thing to do at this current time. If you're trying to get a few fair voices fighting one side of the argument. But I think we do forget with the BBC, its global soft power reach. For many around the world, it does offer, unbiased reporting that may not otherwise be seen in some parts of the world and at difficult and troubled times. So on that basis, I'm very supportive of those aspects of what it does.
So would you criticise Nadine Dorries for effectively, since she's been Secretary of State, really consistently trying to destabilise the BBC? Because you're right, it is admired the world over.
I don't know quite what is behind what she thinks today. I think the debate has to be had because, as we've said, it is a slightly odd funding formula because you have no choice in it. And that in itself, in the modern world, if you want to buy a Domino's pizza, you'll have a Domino's pizza. If you want to buy, a Ford car, you'll buy a Ford car, but you don't have a choice. whether you want to pay for the BBC. That is just denied to you. But that in itself, the trouble is it needs a core of funds to do all those things that we do like of it. And without that guaranteed core, we could lose it. So I'm happy to have the debate. I'm not sold on one side or the other at the moment.
OK, thank you very much indeed all for your answers on that question. We have quite a deep and meaningful question coming up, believe it or not, about Boris Johnson. It's 17 minutes past 8.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
20 past 8, Sally in North London has texted, I stopped watching EastEnders about 4 years ago, and that was pretty much the only thing I would watch on the BBC. I sucked up the cost of it because my daughter used to watch CBBC, but she's grown out of that now. I get my news from LBC, which is great and free. I get my entertainment from Netflix and Amazon, which are both cheaper a month than what I pay the BBC per month. So what am I paying them for? Is that right? I'm not sure that is right, whether the BBC per month is cheaper than Netflix and Amazon. Well, it certainly isn't together anyway. Right, let's move on to another question for our panel. It's from David in Enfield. Hello, David.
Good evening, panel. My question is, the 5 most important principles of public life are leadership, integrity, honesty, openness, and accountability. Does the panel think the Johnson government has followed these during the past 2 years?
Yasmin.
No, absolutely not. These are the Nolan principles. Actually, there are a few more than that. I just was listing them the other day. And these came in relatively recently in our political history as a result of some terrible scandals, the expenses scandals some of the things that happen that shouldn't happen in what is still actually until very recently admired the world over as a mature, stable and relatively honest democracy. So none of them, I was thinking, have any of them been followed by our Prime Minister and some of his closest, nearest and dearest, politically nearest and dearest? And the answer is no. And I think, not only is that shocking and bad for them, it's a real disaster for the nation. Because when you lose the foundations, I've been in countries in the last sort of before COVID, where there were, where the countries fought to be liberated from Britain. And in at least 3 or 4 of them, including Uganda, where I come from, people would say to me, but you know what? They are honest. They're not corrupt like our politicians. And it's like as the whole of history has been turned, that they look up to this country and look what the country is becoming. And we should all, whatever political colour we paint ourselves in, we should really care that those fundamental principles are just being thrown away as if they're Primark clothes. Forgive me, Primark.
Ryan Shorthouse, you're on the centre right. You would want to answer yes to these. This question: do the panel think Boris Johnson has these important principles of public life? But can you, hand on heart, do so?
Well, we've just criticised Nadine Dorries, haven't we, for announcing a policy on Twitter. And all the news I've heard about the breaking of rules, etc., have come through Twitter or the news. So I think it's right to wait for this inquiry that Sue Gray. And by the way, all of my friends are saying, who is Sue Gray? Because she's always in the news at the moment. But she's
a wonderful woman. That's all people need to know.
Exactly. But if it's found that Boris Johnson has obviously and consistently broken the rules that he set, then yes, I think he should resign. If he's broken them in spirit or to the letter of the rules, I do think he should resign, because it's important that the principles are followed, and it's just, I think, a matter of reciprocity, that if you set the rules, you should follow them. And if there's kind of one mistake that's been made, I mean, I saw in the papers, for example, this weekend, Carrie Johnson was at a social gathering and she did a photo next to a friend. If it's one mistake that people make, fine. But if it's done consistently, and that is found from this report that Sue Gray is doing, then I think it is the honourable thing for the Prime Minister to do, to resign. Of course, the question is, will he? And if he doesn't, which I doubt very much he will, considering his previous behaviour, then it's really up to the Conservative Party and the Cabinet in particular to make the decision about whether he goes or not. And at the moment, they all seem to be very much behind him. Maybe Rishi Sunak is slightly lukewarm, but until some prominent figure moves against the Prime Minister, I don't think he'll resign.
Iain, can I just come back just for a second to Ryan? I don't think it is just this scandal. It's the kind of people he stuffed the Lords with. It's absolutely evidenced cronyism. It's where the contracts were sent to. So this what's happening now is a small, and it's not just Boris Johnson. It's not just Boris Johnson.
I don't think the House of Lords appointments are necessarily any different to what previous Prime Ministers have done around appointments, to be honest. So I don't agree with you on that particular issue.
Craig Mackinlay, I've been getting calls from Conservatives this evening who are saying, well, we can't put up with this any longer. Steve Baker reckons that in his constituency it's 60-1 against Boris Johnson. What's it like where you are in South Thanet? What's been the reaction from your constituents? And then we'll come on to the question.
I've received a huge number of emails over the last few days. I think I finished about the 250th letter today, outlining my position on it. So, yes, it's caused a lot of upset. I think it's probably only about half the number I had over the Barnard Castle incident last year. But a lot of them, I must say, and I must tell you in all honesty, are cut and paste from some campaign organisation that people have filled in. But, yes, there is anger out there. And that anger is because whilst the rest of us, and you and I and everybody probably on this call, were doing the right thing, whether we like the rules or not. I thought a lot of the rules were rather ridiculous, but they were the law of the land, went through Parliament. I voted against them, but so be it. And that's what is rankling people and annoying people, that they did all the right things because they were told to do so. We had laws that were backed up, or rules that were backed up with the force of law, and it seems in Downing Street they weren't complying with them. I mean, if you're being charitable, and frankly, I'm not feeling that charitable on this, Ian. They were all working together in a work bubble of sorts. So in terms of risk and all the rest of it, it probably wasn't there. But the optics of this, how anybody within any HR department that is in operation in Downing Street could have thought any of this was a good idea, is beyond me. Just think about a big corporate with a similar number of people, 300 people working in an office. They would never have thought this was a good idea to have a do in the garden, no matter whether it was safe or not. When, what would this look like in terms of the reputation and integrity of an institution? But, what David's point were the Nolan principles. And, what I know Yasmin is annoyed about this, we're all annoyed, but I think the difference between the UK, even where it is at the moment, and many regimes around the world, you noted Uganda, I think it's quite a different place. I really do. And I know it's easy to call for the head of a prime minister, but that puts into a train of events that are truly chaotic. And I think we need to look at that very carefully.
I mean, you are sounding quite annoyed and upset about all of this. Are you considering putting in a letter? Have you put in a letter?
I haven't put in a letter, no. And at the present time on this, no, I'm not likely to be putting in a letter.
Would you be provoked to be, if Dominic Cummings' allegations that the Prime Minister did know about, he went to the party, so he clearly knew about it on May the 20th, not only knew about it, but had actually given his approval for it, which is what the Dominic Cummings allegation is. Beth Rigby tonight has got two sources in Downing Street that appear to confirm what Dominic Cummings has said. That would be incredibly serious, wouldn't it? If he'd come to Parliament last week and given his version of events but hadn't mentioned that is effectively not telling the truth to Parliament.
Well, we'll have to examine the words that he said and then the words that others, if and when they're proved by Sue Gray. So there's a long way to go on this. But and I have likened this a little, Ian, to you go to a restaurant, you go a dozen times and it's been great. And the one time that it's very poor, that's the one you remember. That's the one you're annoyed about. That's the one that you go on Twitter and everything else saying how dreadful it is. There are mistakes made, and I think he's made an admission of those mistakes. And the apology he made last week, I think, was a fairly fulsome one.
Okay,
but
Dorothy Byrne.
Where do we go from there? Is that enough?
I cannot believe that you found that a fulsome apology. I mean, as a woman, I'm so used to the idea that if a man does something wrong, he says to you, "I'm so sorry that you're upset. I'm so sorry that," he doesn't say sorry. He says he's sorry that he's upset you. And that's the sort of apology this is. I mean, one of the things at the time of lockdown that struck me was we were being told to obey this government, but I kept noticing that they all kept getting COVID. I mean, it seemed to run rampant through the Department of Health, rampant through Downing Street.
Not as often as Keir Starmer gets it.
Well... But I'm concentrating here on the government. My friends in Archway weren't all getting it at this level. And of course, now we know that they were all breaking all the rules. But the most important point about your questioner's issue that they're raising is that this doesn't just, Boris Johnson's lies undermine our belief in Boris Johnson, or even in the Conservative Party. It undermines people's trust in democracy itself. There are really frightening statistics in America about how few young people really believe in democracy. And we do not want to become like the United States of America, where people lose their fundamental belief that democracy works. And we need to have honest politicians, and we need to call them out, because that is the only way in which we can keep our democracy safe. Back in August 2019, I was condemned in the Mail and the Sun in editorials for saying, what do we do when a known liar becomes Prime Minister? And now they're all saying he's a known liar, as far as I can make out. And you know, the reason that journalists at the BBC, like Nick Robinson, who have been criticised for doing this, need to keep calling out the lies is to preserve our democracy. And I think it's a great shame that it's taken all this time for right-wing newspapers to finally come out and criticise Boris Johnson for what all of us have known. Of course, he isn't honest and open and doesn't have integrity. Everybody knows that.
Well, I will plead guilty to a bit of that, because I used to pick up callers or Labour politicians when on air they would call Boris Johnson a liar. I've stopped doing that now because the evidence, I think, is I'm afraid, far too overwhelming. And if you want to hear more of Dorothy's views on that, you can hear her interview with me on the LBC Book Club podcast, where she talks about her book, whose title is, Dorothy?
Trust me, I'm not a politician, but I could add to it now. Trust me, I'm not a politician, and I'm not called Boris Johnson, and I've never had COVID.
Yeah, well, that's a hostage to fortune, isn't it? We'll come back to our panel in just a moment. It's 8:33 on LBC. Time for the news headlines with Andy Ivy.
Former adviser Dominic Cummings claims the Prime Minister knew in advance about a Downing Street drinks party during the first coronavirus lockdown and would swear under oath Boris Johnson lied to Parliament. Mr Johnson has insisted he didn't know about the do in the garden of Number 10 in May 2020. A distress signal's been detected on isolated Tonga Islands that are home to 105 people following Saturday's tsunami. It's been confirmed British woman Angela Glover, who ran an animal welfare charity there, died when waves swept her away. Thames Valley Police say an 18-year-old woman who went missing after a night out in Windsor at the weekend has been found safe and well. A 21-year-old man from Reading has been arrested on suspicion of a number of offences, including battery, false imprisonment and making threats to kill. LBC weather, a frosty night with fog, dense in places, a low of -2 Celsius. Tomorrow, that fog slow to clear, some sunny spells later and a high of 10 degrees.
This is LBC. Ask Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
8:37. Let me reintroduce my panel. Yasmin Alibhai-Brown is journalist, author and political commentator. Dorothy Byrne is former editor-at-large at Channel 4 News and current president of Murray Edwards College, Cambridge. Ryan Shorthouse is director of the centre-right supporting think tank Bright Blue. And Craig Mackinlay is Conservative MP for South Thanet. Claire in Edgware is on the line. Claire, very good evening. What's your question, please?
Good evening, Alan, and stellar panel tonight.
Alan?
My goodness.
Who's Alan? Who's Alan?
Iain.
I'm not offended. I've only been here 12 years.
Is the panel pleased about Jeremy Corbyn starting a new political party, presumably another socialist party, and possibly splitting the socialist vote, and the Labour Party being found not guilty of institutional anti-Semitism by the Equalities and Human Rights Commission after a 2-year investigation?
I don't think Jeremy Corbyn's confirmed that he's starting his own party, but let's answer the question on the assumption that he is. Craig Mackinlay, does this make you quake in your boots in South Thanet?
No, not really, no. I mean, it's funny, isn't it? The difference we've got today is that I was fully supportive of Jeremy Corbyn. I thought he was the best asset in politics for the Conservative Party, and he is the reason, as well as the Brexit battles that we were fighting at the time, that we ended up with that very, very strong majority and the Red Wall wins. But will he go off on his own? He probably spiritually should. But let's not forget that the current leader of the Labour Party was fully supportive of him, while Jeremy Corbyn was a leader and was willing to advance his agenda and advance the 2019 election. Will he do it? I don't know, but he's not fully part of the Labour Party at the moment, so I suppose he's almost halfway there. But does this split votes? Well, we know what smaller parties, they tend to have a tough time of it, but do they peel off a few percent? Yes, that's possible. And will that be good or bad for the Conservative Party, or will he not do it? I don't know. But Jeremy Corbyn is an interesting politician, shall we say? But it's funny, isn't it? The anti-Semitism, the Barry Gardiner bits and pieces last week, all of that just floats over the head of everybody, while we enjoy the manna from heaven that is the Boris Johnson predicament at the moment. But we seem to forget all of these things. And I do say, are we all without sin? Are we all living in glass houses with double glazing and a bit of chicken wire on top? Perhaps we should, because I think none of us are without sin. And on these things, we're human. And unfortunately,
feel free to tell us about your own sins if you wish. I mean, we're here to help.
There are probably a few, but I'm pretty sure there weren't any during this COVID period. But maybe there were. Maybe I did sort of walk on a crack of the pavement that somebody wants to pick up. But there we are.
Dorothy Byrne, they say that if you don't learn the lessons of history, you're condemned to repeat it. Well, the lesson from history is that if the left splinter, the Conservatives stay in power. Do you think that's occurred to Jeremy Corbyn?
Well, I am actually a constituent of Jeremy Corbyn.
Are you?
It's not splitting my vote because he lost it some time ago. Yeah. I feel that Jeremy Corbyn is as much a loss to politics as his brother is a loss to medicine.
Is that all you have to say?
But I'm afraid the Tories are not going to win in Archway, because the idea that Boris Johnson could lead a party that would win over people living on the Holloway Road that's never going to happen.
Okay. Ryan?
Yeah, I mean, I think Keir Starmer will be very pleased with Corbyn distancing himself from the mainstream Labour Party. I think he'd probably see that as an advantage. I mean, the evidence I've seen from the last election is, yes, Boris cut through with the Get Brexit Done slogan, but actually what happened was a loss of support from traditional Labour voters and Jeremy Corbyn really putting them off. So I think Jeremy distancing himself from the Labour Party, mainstream Labour Party, is probably something that Keir Starmer sees as an asset. On the point of anti-Semitism, I think this is an interesting thing, and the clearance that's been given. I've never personally thought that Jeremy Corbyn is anti-Semitic. But I do think there's an issue on the left, which is its view of the world, which is very sort of anti-imperialist, indulges sort of intersectionist politics, it's a kind of communalist view of the world. There's different groups, powerful groups, weak groups. And, I think a lot of people on the left see Jewish people in this very powerful group, and therefore that stems into the anti-Semitism that sometimes can happen. And this is, I think, a blind...
That's a lot of people on the left. I think it's some people on the left.
I agree. I'm saying
my left-wing friends have campaigned throughout their lives against anti-Semitism. So I don't think we should leave people with the impression that a lot of left-wing people...
No, I'm not. I'm not saying that. I agree with you on that. But I do think it is a weakness, and it's a weak spot for some people on the left, and there is lots of evidence that there were people on the left.
To be fair, there's evidence of anti-Semitism on the hard left and the hard right. If you look back I'm reading Chips Channon's diaries at the moment, where you don't have to go too far into those to find lots of examples of anti-Semitism. Yasmin.
See, I've never been. I don't like turning people into witches. I don't even care for what's happening to Boris Johnson at the moment, because his enablers and his supporters who put him into the place he's in are equally responsible. Now, with Jeremy's not an anti-Semite, as Ryan said. I do not believe he's an evil man. He was a hopeless leader. And what I think he could do and he should do is not set up another party, but maybe stand as an independent in Dorothy's constituency and test the waters. But I do find it unpleasant when these things are said about the left, because what is meshed in there is, as a left-wing person, I am incredibly concerned about how Palestinians are being treated by the Israeli state. Somehow, in the last 2 years, that has been included in a definition of anti-Semitism. I agree with Ryan that there is a kind of belief of Jewish power and wealth, which both right-wing and left-wing people hold. But I think what has happened has been very wrong, that those who criticize Israel's policies towards Palestinians are also, I am branded an anti-Semite, because I believe...
We're going slightly off the question, Yasmin, if you don't mind. What about the prospect of him starting his own party? That's what the question was.
That would be stupid. Even more stupid than standing as leader.
Well, he is quite stupid, so he might do it.
But he's a gentle soul in some ways too.
Right. Well, not a lot of enthusiasm for a Corbyn party here, Claire. You're clearly an enthusiast.
Well, may I just say, I am a huge admirer of Yasmin. I read everything she writes avidly. As a black woman, she's one of my heroines. She's my friend's heroines. We absolutely adore her, and may she go on forever. But with regard to Jeremy Corbyn, he's better off standing as an independent. I want him to be brought back into the Labour Party and to have the whip returned, because it should not have been withdrawn. And I've never heard anybody on LBC or anywhere say to the Labour Party, after a really tortuous investigation where they were slammed and vilified, congratulations on being found not guilty of institutional anti-Semitism. Everybody just said, oh, well, okay. You know, I'm astonished that nobody said well done after withstanding such a horrendous investigation.
I mean, were they cleared completely?
Institutional, yeah. They were found guilty of 3 illegal acts, but they weren't found guilty of institutional anti-Semitism.
Claire, thank you very much.
Can I just say, Ian, sorry.
Go on, Yasmin.
I agree with you totally that he should be readmitted into the Labour Party, but Keir Starmer isn't going to let him do that. And so I think he should stand as an independent.
OK, right, we'll move on in just a second. It's 8:46.
LBC. Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Weekday mornings from 7.
The first cool Keir of the year. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer. Daily Mail. Starmer must say sorry for drinks in lockdown. Tory MPs asked what's the difference between Sir Keir's beer and PM's work event.
We were working in the office
Boris Johnson said
and a takeaway turned up.
Just for the look that it gave, Sir Keir, are you prepared to apologise?
Nick, we didn't break any rules. We were working in the office and we stopped for a takeaway. There comes a point at which the Tories try to take everybody into the gutter with them. gentleman.
For the look of it, you're not prepared to apologise.
We did nothing wrong.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Back tomorrow morning from 7. Listen on your radio and on Global Player, LBC.
Excuse me, is there a...
With Iain Dale on LBC.
It's 10 to 9. Craig Mackinlay, Ryan Shorthouse, Dorothy Byrne and Yasmin Alibhai-Brown answering your questions. Here's a text question from Bernadine in Nottingham. A former aide has claimed today that Downing Street could start boozing at lunch and wake up in the same clothes after crashing on sofas as part of long-standing drinking culture. We've all done that. Come on, haven't we? Every weekend, city centres are filled with drunken embarrassments. Does the UK need to have a serious conversation about its relationship with alcohol? We've always had in this country a bit of a weird relationship with alcohol, even going back to the sort of 1700s, haven't we? Have we learned anything, Ryan Shorthouse, and do you think we need to have a proper debate about it?
Well, I mean, there are examples, including in Downing Street, which aren't particularly good, but the long-term trend suggests that we're drinking less, and there's a sort of rise in teetotalism, and that's particularly prominent amongst younger people. So I think on the whole, there has been a sort of healthier relationship that's developed with drink. But of course, there are isolated examples which, you know, leads to sort of bad outcomes for the individual involved, but also sort of wider antisocial outcomes. I think actually there is probably more of an issue around middle-aged people drinking and drinking alone often, and some of the sort of health conditions that arise from that. That is a problem that some doctors say that we should be a lot more mindful of. So, you know, and that's related to loneliness, to changing work patterns and lifestyles. So I think, I don't think we should just be thinking Britain has a huge yob culture and we should be really worried about it. Of course, there are isolated incidents that need to be dealt with, but on the whole, I think there's positive trends around that. Actually, I think we need to be a little bit more mindful of middle-aged drinkers who are often drinking alone, and that's associated with quite poor health outcomes. So I think
we should be happy that in Downing Street they were all drinking together. At least they weren't drinking alone. I mean, you are right about young people drinking less, but again, there's a report this week that millions of people are drinking 50 units a week. So I wonder if we should send some young people into Downing Street to give them a bit of help and therapy. My own daughter is a vegan and doesn't drink, and I hope she won't mind if I offer her up to go into Boris Johnson's office and give them a little bit of health and advice. I mean,
I think Dorothy, part of the problem is that the complaint is that there are too many young people in Downing Street, that he hasn't got enough sort of grey hairs giving him advice.
So he's blaming youth for the drink culture. I don't quite get that.
Yasmin, Dennis Thatcher once said, I do have a drink problem. My drink problem is that I can't get enough of it. Do you think that's the problem that a lot of people in politics have? Because it is, I suppose it's the same in a lot of areas where if you work hard, play hard, that always inevitably involves a lot of drink, doesn't it?
I've never understood the drink culture in this country because I came as an immigrant, and I still can't get my head around how people say they can't have a good time unless they've had a drink. That, a suitcase of liquor had to be taken to where, government's operating. And, it's just such a deep... Almost everybody in my family thinks I'm stupid or a loon for having these views about why do you have to drink so much? I even said it at Christmas and they thought I was truly crazy. But... it's either a laugh, it goes right back, doesn't it? You look at the cartoons of Hogarth in the 18th century. The drink is at the heart of so much of British culture. And actually, Ryan is right that, the young people have become much more clean in their habits and careful about how they take care of their bodies and so on. But I fear that the culture is really sodden with drink. And it is the norm. Lots of Muslim people who work in various offices often are excluded because they don't think they want to go to a pub at the end of the day. It is such a part of networking. And it disadvantages them that they don't drink. There's all kinds of... So I remain perturbed by this culture. And that includes my dear husband, by the way.
Well, are you calling your husband I can't use the word that I want to use, but something head?
No, that he thinks drink is normal, it's fun, it is something you need to have a good time, you need when you're having a bad time, you need when you're tired, you need when you're happy, and I can't understand this.
Now, Craig, do you like to have I know you like to have a good time, but do you need to take drink to do it?
Well, let me tell you this, Ian. I'm not going to become a new adherent to the temperance movement anytime soon. But I think this does raise some quite interesting questions. I'm not sure the high streets are any worse now than when I were a lad at age 18. I think they're similar, but it is peculiar. My wife is Hungarian, and she is always quite shocked about the state of our high streets because you don't see that type of drinking culture on the streets in many other European countries. Maybe that is a remnant of the First World War, when we had those early closing time and everyone went absolutely bonkers over the few hours they were allowed to drink, and we haven't quite got over that. I mean, far from when we had to change the licensing rules under Tony Blair, where we had the 24 hours possible, that was meant to be the new panacea, so we'd all sip a sort of a long vermouth on the veranda and adopt some sort of continental culture. Well, I'm not entirely sure that works. I think the drinking just went on longer. But, I'm not one of those that wants to demonise a nanny state and all the rest of it. That's far, far away from what I want to be. But I think Ryan highlighted some very interesting points that I think the COVID period has caused some problems, because you've had a lot of people who are on their own or just not allowed out or not gone out. And so they have reached for the bottle. And, at times, I must say, and when the height of the lockdown, it was, well, I'm going to cook this evening. We might as well open a bottle of wine, shall we? Where, as in normal times, I wouldn't have done that. But I think it was a sense of boredom, a sense of, well, it's just a little treat around the corner in this very mundane life that we were living. The worry is that's going to be entrenched for a longer period. And I think, as Ryan said, middle-aged drinking could be a serious problem, health problems into the future. But I'm not a nanny stater. You go to heaven or hell in a handcart of your own.
I'd never have guessed. Well, it's always wine o'clock on this programme. In fact, you need to have a bottle to get through it sometimes, I suspect. But anyway, not tonight, though, with our wonderful panel. Our final text at the end of the programme, it's Julia in Brighton. Keir Starmer says Gary Neville should run to become a Labour MP. I suspect he wants to be Mayor of Manchester. Who else would you like to see come into politics? Yasmin, have you ever thought of going into politics?
Can you imagine me in politics?
Be entertaining.
Oh, God. I wouldn't inflict that. Who else? I quite like Gary Lineker. He's a very thoughtful man. So go on, Gary.
Well, he can afford to do it. You'd rather have Marcus Rashford, Dorothy.
He's too young.
Okay. Oh, yeah, he'd be great, and he's not an alcoholic.
Ryan?
Well, there's a sort of issue with the celebrification of politics generally, and lots of celebrities going into it. Just coming to my mind, somebody, there was, I don't know if you remember the Finsbury Park attack in 2017, the imam there who did a wonderful thing in terms of protecting the person who was committing the terrorist attack, Mohammed Mahmood, and I think he got an honours eventually, quite rightly. Someone like that would be brilliant in politics.
Craig?
Well, Ian, it's you, my friend. You should be the one that's in this place. And you could be enjoying this fun like we all do on a daily basis. But, no, I would say I haven't got one up my sleeve of some, dynamic character I'd like to see in Parliament. I would say that the Conservative Party we currently have making up the MPs is pretty broad, is pretty wide. I like to see people who've done something in their lives personally, who can bring a bit of experience to the role. I think that's very much needed. And just carrying on from, I think it was, whose question was it? David's question. I do think we need some adults in Downing Street and perhaps some wise heads across the whole of the Palace of Westminster. I'm a bit opposed to the celebrification of the process. I think we need some wise heads, people with experience, and let's get on with the job properly.
Well, I did try, Craig, but the electorate fought back, and they've lost. They've had the chance now. But thank you very much indeed to you all, Craig Mackinlay, Yasmin Alibhai-Brown, Dorothy Byrne, and Ryan Shorthouse. We, of course, will be back with Cross Question tomorrow at 8. And if you've missed any previous episodes, you can catch up on Global Player. Coming up in the next hour, we are going to talk about the fact that more than £4 billion of public cash taken from fraudsters from COVID support schemes has been written off by the Treasury. What's your reaction to that? And are you a bit vexed? Maybe if you're a victim of the loan charge fines, maybe you think maybe the Treasury could be a little bit more lax with you if they're so willing to write off this money. 0345 6060 973. It's 1 minute past 9.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, it's claimed the Prime Minister was warned in advance that staff were holding a Bring Your Own Booze party at Downing Street despite a national COVID lockdown. Boris Johnson's former aide